Welcome back, family, to another episode of Truth Be Told podcast, where we'll be telling the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help us God. This will be the third and final episode of All Roads Lead to Egypt instead of Rome. So I know we are typically taught that all roads lead to Rome, but if you study Rome, you will find that most of their ideals and information kind of stem from Egyptology with their own spin on it. But I digress. So if you haven't watched the first two episodes, I suggest you go back because we're literally starting from the creation story of Adam and Eve, or if you believe in the science theory of atoms being the center of everything on the planet, we basically attribute and correlate that to the primordial Egyptian god Atum, Atum. Like I said, if you didn't watch the first two episodes, you'll want to go back because we're literally taking you from beginning of creation story, beginning of creation in life to current and modern times, right? So in this episode, I wanted to finish off where we left off in episode 2, the intention of ascension, right? So we kind of discussed briefly ascension in the last video and how being well intended in anything you do should be the goal, right? Specifically ascension, because this deals with yourself. You're on a personal level and a soul level, right? So you don't want to just do anything for the sake of doing it, or God forbid, doing it for the sake of some ill will for others. So we talked about briefly the supposed illuminated ones, the ones with the information, the Illuminati, if you will, who supposedly have the secrets of the earth and kind of know the key to, I'll just say, ascension, right? So when I talk about ascension, I'm basically speaking on going from a lower standpoint to a higher standpoint. So we can talk about this in mindset, where you're going from ego thinking and behavior patterns to more Christ consciousness. Um, we can attribute this to just vibration and frequency, where you are going from operating out of the root and sacral lower chakras, which again feed the ego, are kind of self-serving, pleasure-based, instant gratification based, to operating out of your third eye crown chakra area, where you are more in tune with self and the world around you, right? So that's what we're talking about in regards to ascension. So with ascension, we talked about how the pyramid is basically a physical representation of ascension, right? Because, you start at a lower level, which is heavier, and the more you go up, of course, it's lighter and it's more aligned with the universe, because like I mentioned before, the pyramids are not just haphazardly placed. They're actually aligned with certain stars and constellations and things like that for specific reasons. So I want you to imagine now, like I said, if you haven't listened to the first two episodes, you want to go back. I kind of gave you a quick synopsis there, but for you to be all caught up in what I'm talking about now, you want to watch the first two episodes. So imagine now first landing in Egypt from, let's say, Europe. During those times, you have the Greeks and Romans kind of doing their thing. We talked about that in other videos. So imagine the Greeks and Romans coming to Egypt for the first time. What we know about Europe uh, currently was still, the thing then. Their climate, gray, cloudy. Back then, we know that the Greeks and Romans basically, their culture seemed to stem around kind of things that were barbaric. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. We see that in various texts, mythologies, movies. A lot of the cultures seem to stem around wars, fighting in the Colosseum, things of that nature. So and not to make it as if Egypt is like a utopia, if you will. Every culture, every race, every place has their issues and infighting and whatever else there is, right? But the culture itself and Greek and Roman mythology seem to me to be based on like wars and conquering other places, and that seemed to be a big bragging point in most of the mythologies, how they were able to go and conquer other places and take over and, whatever. So if they weren't fighting in the Colosseum, they were fighting wars to obtain more land spaces and masses. Imagine them first landing in Egypt. First of all, we know the climate of Africa is already different, a sunnier, more vibrant place. So that one there had to be a shocker. And then now just imagine seeing the pyramids for the first time, close up, live and direct. Seeing the Sphinx for the first time, damn near everything lined in gold. I mean, if you know Egypt culture, you know that even the poor people wore gold, and were adorned in gold, because this was seen as a connection to the sun god Ra, right? And kind of a way to reflect that sun energy, if you will. So imagine now seeing hieroglyphs from floor to ceiling, just interacting with these people who were very spiritually grounded people, very spiritually conscious people. To this day, these were some of the most spiritual people we've ever heard of, right? They were so connected. And while, a lot of indigenous cultures are more rooted and grounded and have a deeper sense of spirituality, their connection is just on another level. Like, clearly, we can see that through the things they left behind for us to find, luckily. So I believe, of course, we know comparison is the thief of joy. It is my belief, and let's be clear, for the sake of saying it, these are my opinions and beliefs. So I will let you know when something is my opinion and when something is a fact that I've read, that I've researched, because I do a lot of studying, right? It is my personal belief, after seeing the grandiosity, if you will, of Egypt, these other cultures and races kind of got in a rush to become the greater race, or the great race, right? So a lot of their mythologies are rooted in the stories told in Egyptology. If you don't know, you gotta look into that. I'm not going all the way into that, but even Christianity's roots are rooted in Egypt mythology. So a lot of the knowledge was taken from Egypt, and we know that. I've also talked about that in episode 2, where the earliest philosophers were actually learning in Africa and Egypt. How do I know that? I was taught that in philosophy class. It was something that was mentioned kind of quickly. It wasn't a deep topic that anyone dove into. I forget specifically which chapter and which philosopher it was who said it, where they mentioned he studied in Africa. But once I saw, so knowing that, it made me do more research and studying, hence the time lapse in getting this third video out, because I wanted to do a little more digging. I was actually guided to do a little more digging so I can bring you guys some more information. What I found out was astonishing, to say the least. Absolutely astonishing. So it was already enough that, the creation story was taken from this primordial God, Atum, right? Come to find out, Pythagoras himself studied in Egypt, studied in Africa, and I believe Southeast Asia. He is the person, okay, let's break it down a little bit. He's the person who came up with the Pythagorean theorem. I don't know if everyone learns this around the world, but in American culture in school, in math class, I want to say algebra or something, you can tell how serious I paid attention to it in school. But his theory on figuring out the missing angles or measurements of triangles is a very um, big topic in school, right? And people always joke here in America why we're not taught about taxes or credit and credit scores and things like that, but they're shoving the Pythagorean theorem down our throats. Come to find out, he studied in Egypt. Now, why do you think he was so concerned with finding the missing angles or measurements of triangles? What would that benefit him, right? But as we know, people are still to this day trying to figure out how the pyramids were built. In order to do that, you would need to know the correct dimensions, right? Right. So he derived a way to calculate different angles and measurements of triangles. Look at that. Something that was also taken from the Egyptian priesthood was the idea of separating classes of people in terms of knowledge and wisdom. So, what he basically learned in Egypt was separating people in two different classes of study. You had the regular people, the general population, who were just trying to get the lesson, trying to move on. And so they were given one set of facts, right? The other set were people who were deep thinkers, who were basically down to do the work to get the deeper knowledge and understanding, who he probably could see would benefit from this deeper knowledge. So these are the earliest secret societies. So the general population, as we know, as we're still taught, is to seek an external God, you know, outside of self. What the smaller groups and secret societies were taught was to seek the internal God, ascending to the God or goddess within. Again, ascension through the chakras, through living from a root sacral ego pleasure based life and experience and behaviors to ascending through the chakras up to your third eye and crown to obtain Christ consciousness, to basically ascending, right? Where would they know that from? Asia. We know that, the whole idea of chakras and alignment and those things, that comes from Asia. So we have two cultures who are spiritually inclined for ascension, right? This is where they've reached in their culture. Not centered around fighting and wars, though they had them. Um, their culture was more based on seeking alignment with the Most High, with the Creator, with Source, whatever you call the thing, entity that has created all of us, right? Essentially, they were robbing the people's culture but neglecting to adopt the nature of the people. So you can take all the information you want, but you neglect to understand the nature of the people themselves. So they took this information and made it seem like these are their own ideas. That gets us to the American dollar bill. Now, many of us have questioned the American dollar bill. So let's explore, shall we? I want you to take a good look at the back of an American $1 bill. Why on earth, of all things that could be on there, why is there a pyramid? Why not a Statue of Liberty, not a scroll of the Constitution, or anything that specifically represents America? Instead, there sits a pyramid with an all-seeing eye at the apex. This is a clear indication of Egyptian influence and inspiration. Now, while the pyramid is suggested to be a sense of strength, like a symbol of strength, why that? Why not the Statue of Liberty? Why not? There's various things they could have put on there, the flag. Why? So, on the pyramid, the apex is where the all seeing eye sits. And if you study Egyptian culture, you know that would be the eye of Ra. The apex is defined as the highest point in a plane or solid figure. I always tell you, if you want to know the history of something, if you want to understand something, know the history. So we define a lot of words here. So if you're not into obtaining knowledge, information, looking up words and digging deeper, this probably isn't the channel for you, because we dig deep, we do the studying to learn. So apex, once I looked up, is defined as the highest point in a plane or solid figure, or the highest level of hierarchy, organization, or other structure regarded as a triangle or pyramid. So we see the pyramid and an eagle. But if you look closely, you can see the apex seems to be detached from the lower regions. Perhaps this disconnection is meant to symbolize the 1% controlling the resources of the world. Basically, this is the highest level of hierarchy in the pyramid scheme that is capitalism, right? So there's no reason for such a small amount of people to dictate and control the masses underneath them, specifically with resources, right? Resources should be open to all. There's no reason we should be struggling every day to live on a planet we didn't ask to be here on. Right? So everything we need is provided for us. But, we've created this money system to where you need money to live. You need money to damn near breathe. You need money to eat. You need money to learn, like, efficiently. So what this also could symbolize, I think, I don't know. To me, here we go with my opinion. I think it's unknowingly. I think it is a subconscious depiction, showing the disconnect from the Most High, ironically, by way of money, right? They even considered, once I looked it up, they were even considering including the children of Israel lost in the wilderness as a theme for the background of the dollar bill. So why didn't they go with that? I think it is extremely important for me, the disconnect there is extremely important because to me it symbolizes a lot of things, and I believe it's a disconnect in ascension as well. Ill-intended ascension, right? What are your intentions of ascending? We will dive deeper into that. So there's some other things on there that we could get into. There's a significance with the number 13, as everything on the back of the dollar are in groups of 13. The arrows, the letters, the stars, etc., all are in 13. They even misspelled one of the words, the E pluribus unum, I think it is. They misspelled it intentionally so the letters could equal out to 13. Very specific. But isn't 13 considered an unlucky number in America? So we won't get into that too much, but just look at the cognitive dissonance, if you will, at how they're telling you one thing, but depicting another thing right on the back of their dollar. So we're the strongest, mightiest country in the world, yet we have symbolism of another country of Africa in our culture on our monetary notes, right? So there's also an eagle on the back. So the eagle can represent a lot of things, freedom and different things like that. We attribute it to. So I looked up, some of the things eagles represent in different cultures because, here in America, we attribute that to like freedom, patriotism, things like that. In Egypt, the eagle is as sacred as the sun. Pagans believed eagles were a representation of Jupiter. For the Druids, the eagle was supreme god. For the Greeks, though, they believed something very specific, specifically Cicero. And once I looked into his thoughts of an eagle, I was kind of blown away. And it ties perfectly to what we're talking about here. So, if you know anything about an eagle, they are the bird that is able to fly the highest. They have impeccable vision, but the great thing about them is their height, the heights at which they can fly. No other bird can fly that high. No other bird can ascend that high. Think about that, what that represents. So Cicero theorized the eagle teaches that the truly wise of society, who are illuminated by the light of virtue, become increasingly like the Most High. So don't lose me here. Stay with me. So through virtue, you become increasingly like the Most High until obtaining enough wisdom that they are high enough to reach the Most High. Now, logically, this appears to be ascension through wisdom by going within. Theologically, though, this could be interpreted as the symbol of Jacob's ladder and kind of parallel to that, right? So Jacob's ladder was basically a dream Jacob had of, I believe it was angels or people going up and down a ladder. So up in the heaven or down out, right? We have the option by way of free will to ascend up the ladder toward all the good, or we can choose to descend down into the darkness of the abyss. While Christians may take the meaning to be like a literal physical ascension to God, Cicero's explanation can be seen as an esoteric explanation of spiritual ascension to Christ consciousness through obtaining wisdom to liberate the mind from the shackles of limited or flawed human perceptions, whether voluntarily or involuntarily. All concepts of the ancient Egyptians. So he's basically describing ascension through wisdom and virtue. Again, going from those pleasure based actions and behaviors of the lower chakras and embodying a more Christ consciousness, living, through the heart space, giving love, showing love, being integral of virtue, and obtaining wisdom. You are now living in a higher space of Christ consciousness, and you're operating yourself as such, right? So, like I said, the intention of ascension is important. I believe once the other cultures saw what they saw in Egypt, they wanted it. Who wouldn't? These were a beautiful people. It was a beautiful culture. It's still just enigmatic and ethereal in its own way. Still to this current day, people are traveling over there. We have all different types of people excavating the land. I won't get into that. All I'm going to say is this. I feel very deeply about this topic. Um, Only a fool would go to a place and dig up the corpses of such spiritual people. I don't understand the thought process around that and how you could think that's a good idea. Also, too, knowing how spiritually inclined they were, these would be the last people I want to dig up. But I digress. If you think it's a good idea, then, why aren't we out digging up everybody else's culture? You know, I would question anyone with that thought process of digging up a corpse. That's like insanity, especially when they took such great measures. People study Egypt all the time, so they know the great measures that they took to make sure their corpses weren't disturbed. So to know that and understand that as a student of Egyptology, and then to still go and disrupt their corpses is insanity. But I digress. Like I said, they saw what was on them and wanted it, not knowing it's rooted in us and it can't be taken. This explains the desperate need to stifle our progress by any means necessary. We are naturally rooted. Our history shows that most indigenous people, like I said, have a strong culture and strong roots. We are connected spiritually very deeply. And it brings me to the movie Sinners, where the main vampire, Remick, he said to Sammy, Preacher Boy, who was a musician, he said, I came for you. If you haven't watched the movie Sinners, I suggest you watch it. Dope, dope, dope Ryan Coogler film. He said, I came for you, Sammy. It's your words, it's your music that could basically connect me back to my ancestors. I can't see them, right? I can't connect with them. So while he was talking about in the movie being a vampire and, though he's immortal, he can't he's disconnected from the spiritual realm, right? So he wanted to reconnect with his Irish Scottish people. He was unable to do that. So you see how you can be all powerful in some things, being immortal, right? And you can live as long as you want to live and have all these powers and do all these things, but you can't connect to your people. And that connection is important. Indigenous people understand that. More culturally grounded people understand that root to family, not only here on the physical plane, but on the spiritual plane, how important that is. The disconnect is from the roots. So let me clarify what I'm trying to convey through mentioning this disconnection from the roots. I want you to imagine a Christmas tree, right? And if you've ever decorated a Christmas tree, you string the lights up around the tree. And typically, what happens is you plug in different sets of lights to cover the entire tree. So, the first string of lights are plugged into the source, and the other strings of lights are plugged into each other, right? So, you have to be connected to the source, to electricity, to the wall, to have these Christmas trees lit up fully with the lights going all around to get to the star at top, right? So to have that connection in alignment with the Most High, you have to be rooted, and those roots have to be connected to a source themselves. So you can have the lights and all the pretty things, but if it's not rooted in the source, in Christ consciousness, in alignment with the spiritual realm, so to speak, you are, let's say, misconnected, right? Because you can run an extension cord, you can do other things to make sure it's lit up. You can get you can probably buy wireless, cordless lights at this point and charge them, and, do all types of stuff. But if those roots, if the first line isn't connected to the source, I want you to pick up this analogy. If the first line of lights is not connected through source, and you want to look at the lines of lights, the string of lights as lineages, right? So if your lineage isn't connected to the source, to a source, if you have a disconnection there, you won't light up all the different lights throughout the different lines or lineages to connect to the stars, the astral realm, the spiritual realm, the higher Christ consciousness, through the crown chakra. So I hope you guys are getting what I'm putting down. If you know, you know. So like I said, while having the knowledge, they're missing that connection from the Most High. We could even correlate this to the story of Esau, an allegory basically where prioritizing worldly desires over spiritual blessings kind of gets you in trouble, right? As I mentioned, there's a bunch of allegories we can gather information from, instead of just haphazardly existing. So instead of just wandering around the world like we have no clue, we have all these stories and instances that we can learn from, that we should be learning from. The world is full of messages for us to learn, whether by way of our religious texts, our upbringing, movies, books. All these things are allegories. And remember, the definition of allegories is like a story or movie or some depiction that has a deeper meaning, right? There's always a moral to the story. So we can see this in the movie with Aladdin. The diamond in the rough was needed. It's meant he could only access the Cave of Wonders, which was in a deserted place. Um, Now that I'm thinking about it, that thing looked awfully like a sphinx because it was like a tiger or some type of cat. So there you go, another allegory. But you could only access it if you were of the right frequency. It had to be a diamond in the rough. It had to be a certain person, with a certain essence, if you will. They sent a bunch of people in there trying to get into the Cave of Wonders. But look who got in. it wasn't the most prestigious person. He wasn't even the most honest person or anything like that. He was someone who was of a lower status in society. And again, another instance of the meek inheriting the earth. But he was able to access the Cave of Wonders because he was in alignment, right? While he might have been named a thief, he was stealing to eat, basically. But he had strong moral character. He would feed other people with the things that he stole. He wasn't greedy. He didn't steal a bunch of things and, have all this gold all over the place. He took what he needed to survive. And unfortunately, society has us in a situation where our survival requires money and not everyone has money. So sometimes you have to do what you have to do to survive. And, often it's frowned upon, but we shouldn't be in these situations in the first place. It shouldn't be so hard to survive. So it's just another instance of, you could have all the resources and the access to knowledge and information, but even if you get it, you still don't really got it. So even if you got it, you don't really got it. You couldn't possibly get it because you couldn't possibly get it if you know, you know. Only certain people are given or gifted certain things. There's a reason for that. They always say, the Most High knows your heart, knows what those intentions will be like. So you get what you get and you don't pitch a fit. But what do you really get if all you want are the tangibles, the gold, the diamonds, right? What would you really get? That's all you'll get. So if that's what you want, okay, you can have that. If that's all you aspire to have is material possessions, gold, power over people, okay, you'll get it. And then what? Are you happy? Are you satisfied? No. We see the people and places and things that have those things, are in power, have all the money they could want, typically are not happy because the true richness is freedom, an unshackled mind or crown chakra, living as your highest self with intention, living in purpose, serving humanity through your purpose. That's where the happiness lies, the true happiness lies. And that'll get you all the freedom and abundance in the world. But if all you're looking is for material things, you'll get material things. And hopefully you like it. Hopefully you're satisfied with that, right? It reminds me of this saying, how could one truly be happy if they're not free? That was something on the Beauty and Beast. Again, another allegory, a story, poem, picture that can be interpreted to reveal a hidden meaning, typically a moral or political one. We see these stories all around us all the time, and we just take them as fairy tales or little cute stories. I remember growing up, I thought I had a little book called Bedtime Bible Stories. I thought it was like fairy tales. That's what it sounded like, right? So I was deriving the moral of the story as I read, just like I did any other book, right? I don't know, I don't know. It was always simple to me. It doesn't seem like a hard concept to get. We could let's talk about the fairy tales for a minute, because I recently saw a preacher talking about it and how, I won't get into it, but he basically was describing, basically them promoting like magic and fairy tales and, the stuff that's non-believable, and basically trying to teach children to be into like witchcraft in a way by spell work and things like that, magicians and fairies and all these things, right? Let me tell you what I got. So from Cinderella and Snow White, to me it was clear the message: the meek shall inherit the earth. In order to lead, you must be willing to serve. Being a good steward of what the Most High has given you, tending to the house or people in your lives despite their actions or whatever may have you, as we saw in both of those movies. By remaining in your principles and values, you inherit the earth. They both inherited the kingdom at the end of the day. So you could look at it as they were always destined for it. But, they were put through a series of things where, it didn't look like it. Like they were pushed and shoved down and pushed into places of servitude. And instead of looking at as a negative, they embraced the role of serving others. That's what true leadership is about. Also, they're a good story on how the first shall be last and the last shall be first. Everybody was ahead of them. If you would do a comparison, you would probably be discouraged because, they had siblings and stepmothers and all these things that were placing themselves ahead of them. However, by remaining humble, being in service and in servitude to others, they were able to inherit the kingdom, heaven on earth, if you want to call it. So let's look at Pocahontas, whose real name is Matoka. And I learned that simply scrolling on TikTok. You can learn anything from anywhere. But in the instances of the movie Pocahontas and Avatar, we learn that all things are divinely made and connected. We are to respect life in all its forms, from the tallest tree to the smallest bumblebee. Pretty easy concepts to get, right? The Lion King and the Black Panther. These ones, these movies are heavy in the power of ancestry in the spiritual realm, our connection to our family, our ancestors, those before us and those after us, right? So, what is meant for you is meant for you. Just how the throne was meant for T'Challa and Lil Simba. They went through the challenges and struggles. They basically had to fight to get to the throne, but that was their rightful place. So they were there in the end of it all. We also learn about the circle of life, Hakuna Matata. No worries, no problems, just meaning have faith. Don't let life's struggles bog you down. Just have hope and faith for things to come. And, have faith. So that is the oil. This is the oil they talk about in religious settings to me, right? The anointing. It's just that energy, that spirit. Think about how permanent oil is. Oil stains are permanent. If it's on you, it's on you. You can't get it off. And typically, if it's on you, it's in you. You ingested some oil or whatever. But the anointing or the oil is that permanent marking that no one can take from you. Just being a good person, spreading love and light, sowing good seeds, not just for self, but for the sake of others, by taking what you're given and being a good steward of it. And a steward or stewardship is just taking care of something to gain favor. Sow good seeds, and you will see growth spring forward. Like I said, definitely not hard concepts to nail. We just need to practice being good people. That connection with the spiritual, ancestral realm is important. That's another thing I wanted to mention in the movie Sinners. Essentially, the vampire was referring to Sammy's exceptional musical gifts that were able to transcend him into a realm where he could connect with the ancestors of the past and also leave his mark for the descendants after him to connect with him. You see, so while there are footsteps we follow, of the ones that came before us, we're supposed to be leaving our mark for those who come after us to follow in our footsteps. And we do that through the anointing, being good people, spreading that love and light, encouraging everyone to do the same and leaving our mark. Not hard, do good, leave good energy with people. You know, they always say, I believe it's a quote from Maya Angelou, people forget what you do for them, but they never forget how you made them feel. You know, just be a person of integrity and respect. That's how you ascend to Christ consciousness. Let's not make this overly difficult. You do that by having good virtues and seeking wisdom to actually ascend. There's no shortcuts. You can't just look at somebody's cliff notes. You really have to get connected and rooted in something bigger than yourself, in source, whatever that looks like for you, whether it's through a various type of religion, spirituality, however that looks for you. Remember not to worry about anybody else's connection. It's all about your connection. Because essentially we are all just stewards for the Most High's grand plan. We have been entrusted to be good people, have faith in the plan, and work with what is given to us so He can multiply through us, right? We see various stories about that in religious texts, so I won't go through that. It's not for us to take from others, to race to the top. That shouldn't be the goal, right? To leave others without or being greedy. Abundance is meant for all, not just a select few. These were the principles taught in Egypt, right? You too can ascend to your highest self. Everyone can have that connection with the Most High. Everyone should have a deep resonance for everything on the planet, respecting and loving everything on the planet. Like I said, from the tallest tree to the smallest bumblebee. Those are the morals and values we should be instilling in our children to pass on the oil, basically, right? This is how we get ahead. This is how we do the work, being of virtue. So these are the principles we know that have been stolen and manipulated and corrupted for capitalistic gain. And that is why you see it currently crumbling. They missed a step. The intention of their ascension was completely off. All they were focused on was obtaining all the gold and all the land. That's it. Obtaining oppression, control. And we know good leadership is not of control and dominance. I spoke on that before. That itself is witchcraft, right? Trying to dominate and control, trying to impose yourself on the free will of others. That in itself is witchcraft. So we won't get into that, but they missed a step. That's why we see the capitalism and its systems crumbling right before our eyes. They completely missed it because they're not rooted, so they don't get it. You see what you see on us, but you don't really know what's in us. The best laid plan is not of man, but of the Most High. So if you know, you know. I'll end the video here because we've been on long enough. As I always say, Truth without love is brutality. Love without truth is hypocrisy. So we must all seek the truth so we can speak the truth so we can all be the truth. Peace, y'all.